Hello and welcome to another episode of Unraveled, where we unravel the most pressing issues shaping our world today. I'm your host, Marvi Sirmed. Our focus tonight is on the idea of normalizing trade between Pakistan and India, the two nuclear armed neighbors. Let's look at some basic facts about Pakistan India trade. Historically, trade between the two countries has been minimal, with Pakistan's exports to India averaging only $400 million annually between 2012 and 2018. As per a recent report, I'm taking these figures from a recent report published by USIP. While India's exports to Pakistan were around $1.8 billion during the same period. However, formal trade was suspended in 2019 following political tensions, particularly after India's revocation of Kashmir's special status. Despite this, an estimated 4 to 5 billion US dollar in goods still move between the two countries through informal channels and rerouting via third parties, countries like UAE. This highlights the potential economic benefits that could be unlocked if official trade relations were normalized, even as the political and security challenges remain significant. Is the trade really a potential avenue for reducing tensions and fostering peace? If it happens at all, will it be at the expense of one party's national pride or the concerns for the perceptions of parity? Can economic ties override deep-seated geopolitical and security concerns, or could they, in fact, exacerbate the risks? We will try and unravel all of this in tonight's show, and to do this, I am joined by a distinguished guest who has been one of Pakistan's foremost experts analyzing strategic and security challenges faced by Pakistan. Mr. Ejaz Haider, the ace journalist who has written extensively on South Asian geopolitics, military strategy, and the intricate balance of power between Pakistan and India. One of his recent works, Should Pakistan Trade with India, has sparked significant debate, particularly on the question of whether trade can indeed pave the way for peace or if it is merely a distraction from the core issues that continue to divide these two nations. Ejaz, welcome to Unraveled. We are thrilled to have you on the show.
Thank you, Marvi. I love the name of your program because, frankly, I don't know whether we'll be able to unravel this, but the world is certainly coming unraveled. So I think that's a great name for the program. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So you have heard the fundamental questions we want to address. Let's start from the basics. As I understand, you're not anti-trade with India, but you as an arch realist treat this question contextually rather than with the liberal, as you put it, liberal parity of the peacemaking notion. So I ask, should Pakistan trade with India?
Okay, thank you, Marvi. Let me put it like this. Look, as I note in my article, hold on, there's a backstory to that article. Let me just quickly give you the backstory.
Yeah, sure.
So we have this fantastic WhatsApp group, which has some of the best minds in Pakistan as part of the group. And we were having this discussion off and on this issue. Now, one of the participants, part of the members of the group, is also a former finance minister. There were others, a couple of business persons. And so, we would keep talking about this. And at some point, I said to myself, okay, let me use these discussions as a peg and write a longish piece. So I spoke with our dear friend, Hassan Zaidi, who is the fantastic editor of Dawn magazine. And he said, sure, go ahead. So that's the backstory. Now to the question. Look, as I mentioned in my article, the question whether X should trade with Y or vice versa is basically specious. Because where there is a seller and a buyer, trade will happen. in your own opening, you said that the third party trade is still going on, even as I was writing my article, and even as you and I are speaking about this. It's going on.
Yeah.
The essential question is whether the third party trade or the informal trade in certain cases can actually become formal dyadic trade. As in officially, the dyad, as in India and Pakistan, can begin trading. So that's one question. The second question is whether, given a history of adversarial relations, is it possible to hermetically seal the idea of trading from everything else? These are the two important questions. Because it's not like we haven't been trading. You just gave figures from 2012 to 2018, in which clearly we were exporting much less than we were importing, but that's really not a point of concern for me here. Now, I must also put out a disclaimer. I'm not a trade economist, so probably a trade economist will approach it differently, but I am definitely looking at it, as you put it contextually, in the broader framework of interstate relations, and also from an historical perspective, not just history between India and Pakistan, but also the issue of trade, or the theoretical formulation that you can trade for peace, i.e., that trade can actually contribute to peace. These are things that scholars have worked on. Now, I can give you a reference, which actually I read it eons ago. And then I actually got interested in this idea from that article, which was penned by an American political scientist, Catherine Barbieri, with a fellow political scientist, Jack Levy. Now, this article, which appeared in the Journal of Peace Research, and it was captioned "Sleeping with the Enemy, the Impact of War on Trade."
Yeah,
now,
you're referencing to article.
The main finding is that there are numerous historical cases of trading with the enemy, even during wartime. And this includes trade in those strategic goods that directly affect the ability of a state to prosecute the war. So the point being that trade will happen, even when states are at war. So that's one thing. The second thing about trade leading to peace is debunked by the fact that prior to World War I, the volumes of trade among European powers that ultimately went to war with each other, as in the two groups that we are talking about, the Triple Entente and the Triple Alliance, the trade volumes are very high. So then the question is, if trade is going to offset war, how come these states went to war? And it was one of the most devastating war up until then of human history. Therefore, the idea is that you cannot isolate trade and use it as a single reference point or single unit of analysis in order to say that once you start trading, everything will be hunky-dory. So this was one of my main points. However, I also mentioned that Dale Copeland, who was a Canadian political scientist, he came up with an article in International Security where he talked about the fact that when trade levels have been high, then why is it? I mean, he was actually answering this, trying to answer this question of why states went to war, even though the trade levels had been high for the previous 30 years in the run-up to World War I. And he said, even if interdependence was a necessary condition for the war, it was not sufficient. So he offered what he called a different syncretic approach.
Hmm.
And he called it a theory of trade expectations. And he brought in a new causal variable. And
Hmm.
that causal variable is the expectation of future trade. What's the impact on the overall expected value of the trading option if a state decides to forego? So levels of interdependence and expectations of future trade, if when you consider them simultaneously, they lead to new predictions.
Hmm.
That was Copeland's idea. But interestingly enough, even the idea of future trade expectations has come under tremendous pressure
Hmm.
since the trade war between China and the United States,
Hmm.
where the world has moved from neoliberal trade to protectionism, block formation,
Hmm.
high tariffs,
Hmm.
and denial of technology to your adversarial state in what we call peer competition. So
Hmm.
my point is, I'll stop here. I'm sure you have other questions, but I just want to give you a broader framework of what I tried to say in that article, which of course is not exhaustive, obviously, by any stretch of the imagination. But I just wanted to put the entire thing in a context. Now, one more thing which I asked, which is what does Pakistan have to offer India?
Yeah.
And one of my very close friends, who obviously totally disagrees with me on this issue, I was at his birthday dinner a few days ago, and I raised this point with another friend, and this friend of mine said, "Oh, listen, if we can trade with the top economies of the world, why can't we trade with India? This is no argument. The issue is that paradoxically, the high-end economies do not produce low value added. So you actually have something to offer to them because they will either have to outsource it, which they do. And so they don't, since they don't do low value added,
Hmm.
they have to get low value added from somewhere else. Whereas India does more than us in terms of value addition,
Hmm.
but it also does, and in some cases, probably better than us, does the low value added that we do. Now, if you juxtapose that
Hmm.
with the Indian government's decision that
Hmm.
it is going to disengage from Pakistan,
Hmm.
then you arrive at a situation
Hmm.
clearly where you have to ask yourself on what grounds
Hmm.
are you going to normalize with India, which is not just about trade normalization, but which is about normalizing relations in a way where you begin to talk about things, including trade.
Okay, so we will, I mean, this is a very important, the last point that you, very important, and we will address it a little later. But first, let me uh, pose this to you again. So all this context, you have provided a very useful framework for us to discuss this. Now, keeping the trade in that context, the context that you have very articulated, articulately, you've articulated very sharp, concisely. Um, should do you think the trade should not happen in this context right now, and it should wait for another time? When happens what?
Listen, the thing is that, we, even when we were trading, every time there was some kind of dip in relations on the issue of something completely different, it impacted trade. We also had this, although India granted us that MFN status,
Hmm.
uh, we had a problem with their non-tariff barriers and their high tariffs.
Hmm.
Okay. But I will not get into that because that's not really my area. You require a different expertise for that. But I'm just simply mentioning that even when the situation had not reached the pass that it has, there were problems. Now, given the present situation, it is not my place to formulate policy. It's not my place to say, well, whether Pakistan should or should not trade with India. It is for the policy makers to sit down, and because I'm assuming that they really have access to the kind of input which I do not have. And so perhaps I do not have the complete picture. But no one has the complete picture. Information is always somewhere or the other problematic, but more than me. So do an analysis. If you think that it is important for you to trade with India, and if you really think that you can bear the cost of that, and now it's not about the cost of trade, it's the cost of you having decided to do something in reaction to what India did unilaterally. India has since cut you loose. Now, if you want to approach India, you will have to bear a cost. Now, you have to decide whether bearing the cost of approaching India is less than the benefit of doing trade with India. If you can say that that is the case, then go ahead and do it. But if you know that the cost of reaching out to India is going to be higher than the benefit of trade, then you will probably have to rethink the entire proposition. That is what I'm saying. Now, let me also, this is a good segue to also talk about another thing, which was part of our discussion when we were discussing this on that WhatsApp group, which was somehow implied. And the implicit reasoning was that trading with India will give a boost to Pakistan's economy. Now, once again, I'm not an economist and I'm not a trade economist. But I do have enough working knowledge of and interest in these issues to know, on the basis of common sense, that much of what, the problems that we have with Pakistan's economy are structural, that have nothing to do with trading or not trading with India. Right? We are already trading with the United States. We're trading massively in North America. We've got GSP Plus, where we're trading in the European Union. And that trade has not really done much for our economy in terms of the structural reforms that we have to do to put it on track. So to say that trading with India will somehow be the panacea, which will suddenly bring our economy back to life, which will suddenly address all the structural reasons that, experts keep talking about, that's not going to happen. So that too is a bogus argument as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. So, I completely understand. But, going by your argument, does Pakistan's trade with USA bring some dividends or not? If it does, which means that if we do away with trade with USA, I'm not talking about India now, doing away with it, just stop trading with USA, will that impact negatively on Pakistan's economy or not? If it does, which means...
No, of course it will. I mean, no one is saying that Pakistan should stop trading. Obviously, we need to increase trade. What I'm saying is that in the case of India, I'm not talking about Afghanistan, I'm not talking about Sri Lanka, I'm not talking about Bangladesh, not about the United States, not Japan, not Canada, not Australia. I'm talking about a specific case of a state with which Pakistan has certain problems. India and Pakistan have been locked in an adversarial framework for a very long time, historically and for very solid reasons. And so therefore, I'll go back to what I said earlier. India did something unilaterally. We decided to do certain things in response to that. India then retaliated in response to our response and decided that it will cut Pakistan loose, that it will use subconventional asymmetric war to wage against Pakistan in Balochistan, elsewhere. At the same time, it will hurt Pakistan internationally at every possible fora, including FATF. And we know that FATF was acting when we were in the grey list. FATF was acting less as a technical body and more as a political body, and it was under pressure. So this is what India has decided. Now, India is not debating whether India should trade with Pakistan or not. We are debating whether Pakistan should trade with India. So we are basically giving a sense that we require trade with India more than India requires trade with Pakistan. And once again, this is where my question comes in. What exactly is it that we can sell to India? Because when I go and read the State Bank of Pakistan reports and other reports that, on about what we were exporting to India, that doesn't really say much about what we can export. It's not high value added. Mostly it can be perishable. A lot of it is low value added. Stuff that India, in some cases, does better than us.
Yeah.
So therefore, India does not have the urge to trade with us. And their policy from their point of view is really good. I mean, they're waiting for Pakistan. They're saying, okay, Pakistan is hurting. It's politically unstable. It's economically near insolvent. And it is stewing in its own juices. We can wait. Now, if they're waiting, and if you have the desire to reach out to them, then you have to decide what the cost of that reaching out would be. That's my point.
And what, in your view, will be the cost of reaching out to? I mean, I will not use this term. I will choose the starting the trade or thinking of starting the trade, doing the negotiations for trade relations. What will be, in your view, the cost of that for Pakistan?
Okay. Roughly constituted as I am, in terms of my thinking, in terms of my experience, if I were an Indian policymaker, I would have said, okay, these guys really need us. They're reaching out to us. This is the time to settle certain issues on India's terms. One issue could be occupied Kashmir. You say, okay, we have a resolution. Now I am putting myself in the shoes of an Indian, right? So we have a resolution in Lok Sabha, which talks about getting Azad Kashmir. But frankly, it's neither here nor there. It's you guys who are interested in occupied Kashmir. So how about you decide that that's a no-go area, right? And let's settle that on the basis of the geographic realities. Then let's settle the issue of force deployment in certain areas. Let's also accept the fact that, we've got Siachen and we can resolve it, but that resolution has to be on our terms. We put forth our proposals back in the late 80s and early 90s. You sign off on that and everything will be okay. We have a position on Sir Creek. It's the midstream Talwick principle. You accept that, and yeah, we're fine. We're fine. And our nuclear uh, development in terms of merving and in terms of SSBNs and in terms of how we are modernizing in terms of our ballistic and cruise missile defenses and the rest of it, frankly, this is because of China. So you guys rest easy.
Mhm.
Don't try to match our developments because they are for China. Now, if you are prepared to do all this, or some of it, because it can be, obviously, there's going to be pushback from the Pakistani side. But we know that if they're desperate, then they'll be able to, or they'll be willing to pay a higher cost. This is how I will approach it if I were an Indian sitting in Delhi.
Mhm.
So the question for the Pakistani policymaker is, are you prepared for exporting, let's say $500 million of goods, or
Mhm.
let's even assume, let's take a jump, $1 billion or $2 billion. Are you prepared to pay that cost?
May I interject at this point,
Yeah,
or
yeah, sure.
so a lot of it is you are speculating and you are just putting a
No, hold
context,
on. No. I have to come in here. I'm not speculating. I'm not
okay.
speculating. Everything that I've said, there's empirical evidence of that in
Okay.
terms of India's actions on the ground, in terms of statements by their leaders, responsible leaders, whether it is their foreign minister, whether it's their defense minister, whether it's their prime minister, whether some of their army generals. So I'm not just, uh, I'm not firing in the air. Uh, it's an occupational hazard. I have to follow what they say, what they do. And so I am just giving you a sense of what they would want to extract from you in
But
order for normalization,
yeah.
whether they can extract it, whether they can extract some of it partially, or whether they can extract more than they might even expect that they can.
Mm.
I don't know. I'm not an astrologist, but I'm just giving you the sense of the, the lay of the land, the sense of the field where you are going to play this game.
It does this, whatever you, I mean, all these points that you have mentioned, I think they are, if they are there, they should raise concerns on Pakistan's side. But when we look at the table, the negotiation table where the trade intricacies have been discussed in past, maybe a distant past now, because since 2019 there have not been any negotiations. But before that, whenever there were negotiations, the babus from both sides did not discuss any of this. This was not on table. It might be in the political statements, might be in the recent statement by the Prime Minister of India when he said that Pakistan doesn't matter for us, we should ignore it, or other statements. But it was not discussed on the negotiation table ever, where trades were. In fact, there was
Because
waiting to speak.
you had different baskets. There was a dialogue framework which kept changing names.
Hmm.
Sometimes it was the pillar, sometimes it was a dialogue framework, and the rest of it. But we're not going into the semantics of it. So there were these baskets, and you were discussing various issues
Hmm.
within those baskets. And basically, the Sherpas would come for every basket, sit together, do their work, and then, of course, it was put forward to the political leadership.
Hmm.
Some of it was, I mean, I remember as far back as, maybe I'm getting it's either 2012 or 2011. I think it was 2012 or 13. But anyway, one of these years. When I was in Delhi for a conference, and this was an Aman Ki Asha conference, and they were discussing what was then called low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
And what was the low-hanging fruit? Siachen and Sir Creek.
Hmm.
And I remember making a presentation there. Najam Sethi Saab was there. There are a number of other people there. I remember making a presentation there saying that this is not low-hanging fruit. And time has proved that it was never low-hanging fruit. So my point is that there is a certain ecosystem in which you have to work your way. We are, because we are really enamored of date palm trees. We get the seeds and we sow them up in Murray, in a hilly area. And they don't, I mean, obviously, they don't flourish. They don't, because they can't. The ecosystem is, the habitat is different. So in the present ecosystem, we have to think about other things. For instance, for me, the most important thing right now for us, it's a necessary, though not sufficient. The most important thing is for us to have political stability, to get rid of the divisiveness that is tearing Pakistan apart. Once we have that necessary condition, then in order to move towards the sufficient condition, we have to start looking at those structural reforms within the economy, without which no amount of trade, nothing, will ever get our economy back on the track. Once we have political stability, once we have something to interest the world, that is the time when you approach the world. For instance, I mentioned Miftah Ismail, who's a very dear friend, the former finance minister. He talked about, Taiwan and China are trading, even though, bad analogy. Taiwan is a world leader in cutting-edge semiconductors. Even when China sanctions some of the imports from Taiwan, it never sanctions, it will never sanction the Taiwanese semiconductors, because China would be shooting itself in the foot if it were to do that. Now, if we had something like that, believe me, regardless of everything else, if that thing was something that India badly needed, we would not have to go to India seeking trade. India will come to us seeking trade. My point being, there is always a cost when you are going to someone.
No,
if someone is coming to you, basic of negotiation theory, when someone is coming to you, then of course, you have the upper hand, and then you can set your term, and then you can reach a certain point of agreement.
Yeah.
But if that is not the case, then you have to bear the cost.
Yeah, I'm still not, I mean, we can discuss this on and on. What cost would be if, you have explained it quite well, but there can be further questions that can be asked on that count. But I'll leave it there for now. Going to the last point that you mentioned was, what value added goods do we have to offer to India if the trade happens? If at all we decide that the trade, we will not have to bear the strategic cost for the trade and we go on with the trade, what do we have to offer? So
I wish I could pull up, I have it somewhere in this machine, some of the reports. We have basically a close border trade, perishable items like fruits and vegetables, and some, what do you call it, dry fruit. Apart from that, we have these low value added, yarn and whatever, these basic textiles and the rest of it. There is nothing in that list. There's nothing in that list that India cannot do without, or that India does not do itself.
Yeah, I do understand your point, but then we do not have any value-added thing for any country in the world. Any Europe can
And
do
that's
without.
my whole point. That's my whole point, Marvi. That's my whole point. We are exporting to high-end economies.
Hmm,
We are exporting low value added, which is useful in
hmm,
terms of textile and some other stuff that we do,
hmm,
sports goods and surgical instruments and the rest of it. Because those high-end economies
hmm,
cannot afford to make those things at home.
hmm.
So they
But India
outsource
can.
them,
Yeah.
or they simply import that stuff from cheap labor markets.
Hmm,
But if you are going to trade with an economy which relatively is, India is a much stronger economy now, and they're doing high value added things also. But they require low value added, but they're doing low value added themselves also, and they're getting a lot of it from Bangladesh. Now what happens, I don't know, as far as Bangladesh is concerned, but they're getting it from Bangladesh. They can get it from Sri Lanka. That my
But
point is,
yeah. Hmm,
China cannot cut Taiwan loose
hmm,
because it needs the semiconductors from Taiwan.
hmm,
India can cut us loose because we do not have anything. If India continues with its policy of disengagement,
hmm,
or let me put it like this, negative engagement,
hmm,
it does not, it's not hurting. It's not hurting.
hmm,
We don't have anything, the absence of which
hmm.
will hurt India. That's my point.
But there's something that India, I mean, uh, although I still have many, for example, we have so much to offer in terms of cultural products. China is making Jainamas for us, tasbih for us, and China is making murtis for India. Do you know China is even making Banarsi sarees for India? So the Banarsi sarees that,
Great.
so
Good for the Chinese.
yeah, and similarly, our onyx industry, for example, it was a great revelation on me when I went to India the first time in the 1990s. Our onyx industry was so sought after for not just murtis, but so many other things. Whenever Indians come to Pakistan, they're first and foremost, where can we buy onyx? And so many other things. Our textile is far superior than what Indians make. Our pigment industry is far superior than what India has in terms of color, fabric color, etc. So there's so many things that we can. And don't you think if we start, because their market, our textile, the things that we make in terms of garments and textile pigments, they have far greater market in India and Bangladesh than they might have in Europe and in the Western countries. So don't you think that if we start selling those things, not the raw material, but the finished products, don't you think the industry will flourish in our own country? Our people will get jobs?
We are, I don't know, I don't think I've really gotten through with my argument. Listen, I'm not saying that there's nothing that we can sell to India. You have just and you know more about this than I do. So you've identified certain areas. And I'm sure we can, export those things to India. My point is, if these things are not coming from Pakistan, they're not hurting India.
Mm.
They're not hurting India. See,
Mm.
if someone says that he can control what I eat,
Mm.
I'm dependent on that person because food is my biological requirement. You know, if he says, if he doesn't give me food one day, it will hurt me. My point is that if you have something which the other state or other states require, then they are dependent on you, whether it is semiconductors, whether it's cobalt, whether it's lithium, whether it's nickel, in terms of these, because of the EV cars and the batteries and the rest of it. If you have something which the other really needs, then you have space, even within an adversarial context, for things to at least shape up in one particular compartment.
Yeah, so till that point, we
So
should stay put.
my point is that given the overall context, you do not have anything that interests India or will interest India or will, force India into seeking that particular compartment and hermetically seal it from the rest of the relationship. You don't have that. That's what I'm saying.
So, but
And
till that
therefore,
point, we should not, I mean, we should stay put and we should not trade till that point. But then we will not be able to reap any benefits out of this cultural product that I mentioned, or, other
you
small
can send
items.
this cultural product to a number of other states in the world. A number of other states would love this cultural product of ours. Okay. There are a number of areas where we can actually get a lot of money. For instance, I worked on one of the projects some time ago, and we identified certain areas, including in terms of remittances, for instance. So a lot of our remittances sometimes are more than our exports. And for the most part, not entirely, but for the most part, these are blue collar workers, and these remittances come from the Gulf. Why can't we identify aging populations in high end economies and actually have a policy of facilitating white collar, exports, human resource export to those countries, and increase the remittances that come back to Pakistan? And I'm not reinventing the wheel. There are a number of countries, including India, that are doing that.
But is this either or situation? I mean, can't we do both?
No, listen, there is no either or situation. What I'm saying is that at the moment, given the situation, low levels of trade with India are not going to do much for your economy in an overall sense. For that, you have to reform the structural issues that sort of bedevil your economy. You have to address those, and you have to address your political instability and your economic situation. So one is a necessary, and the other in combination is the sufficient condition for you to get to a point. I mean, it's not just about, you cannot run in a state where you can barely stand. Okay. So once you stand and you firmed yourself up, then you can think about walking and running and interesting the world. My final point would be that, because after this, I'll be repeating everything that I've said. My final point is that, we need to begin to focus on the economy and trading with India, dyadic trade, because trade with India is already happening.
Yeah.
Through third and fourth parties, they are happening. That is what scholarship also says. That is what empirical evidence also says. That trade is not going to stop. Official dyadic trade had low volumes earlier. The context has changed. Even you cannot bear the cost. When I talk about the cost, it's not a laboratory, and I don't have test tubes in which I can, mix the chemicals and show you the result of that. But I can assure you that there's going to be a cost. And I can also assure you, or at least I am very confident that the cost of that reaching out will be much higher than the benefit of low-level trade. So I think that is where I come from. And I'm not saying that I am right. That's how I look at it. That's how I have analyzed it. That's how I put it out in Dawn magazine. Some other guest of yours might completely disagree with me. As I said, most of the people disagree with me when I say this. But the problem is that when I raise questions about the cost, when I raise questions about whether trading with India can actually address the structural problems in Pakistan's economy, when I ask the question of what exactly is it that Pakistan can offer to India, which can actually increase the volumes of trade, they don't really have any response to that. Which is why the reason I put it out in Dawn magazine was for the experts to respond to that. But no one did. I mean, either because they never read what I wrote, or because they thought it was so stupid that it wasn't worth responding to.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Pakistan's because print media is not consumed as much as the broadcast media is consumed nowadays. But in Pakistan, unfortunately, even broadcast media does not read much and reflect on what is written. I see in the US and India even I see a lot of broadcast journalists discussing these issues. And we will try and keep discussing with you and other very important points of view that are there on this issue and others. But just before I conclude, Ejaz, I'm compelled to ask you about Pakistan's trade. I totally understand your point of view between, about trade between Pakistan and India. But when it comes to acting as conduit to trade between India and Afghanistan, we are faltering there as well. Do you think even that will bear a higher cost for Pakistan if we allow the trade through us?
I mean, apologies, but I have to say that when we say we are faltering, it seems to imply that what the state of Pakistan does, it does it in some kind of vacuum, or it does those things because somehow it is the only bad state in the region, and everyone else belongs to the order of Sisters of Mercy.
No, that was not implied at all.
No, I mean, I'm telling you that this is so. When Pakistan says that we will not allow overland Indian trucks to go to Afghanistan, and this is not the first time. I mean, now we have the Taliban government, but for 20 years, the Karzai government, then the Ghani government, and this was something that was always an issue of a bone of contention. And I do think that there was a time when this issue could have been resolved. Because the context was, or the atmosphere, if you will, was relatively more conducive. But now, given the overall context, expect to facilitate India at a time when India is doing everything to basically harm Pakistan, whether through subconventional means, whether through diplomatic means, whether through disinformation, whether through various other things. I don't think that, again, is likely to have a cost. But I take your broader point that even if we go by the national security policy that was put out by then Prime Minister Imran Khan's government, it talks about connectivity. And obviously, connectivity requires that we become a roundabout. And I hope that after we have resolved the issues of political instability and done some basic economic reforms, that we can then begin to shape the environment in a way where we can sort of do these things, which are obviously important. And I will be the last person to say that we should constantly live in a region which is adversarial. But there is no tabula rasa, there's no clean slate, and no one can get a tabula rasa. So I think there is a lot of baggage. And when we are talking about policy formulation or analyzing the situation, we have to basically look at what's already there on the slate. And what's on the slate makes it increasingly more difficult to go for cooperative policies. So that's my bottom line.
Okay. No, thank you, Ejaz. I just want to clarify one thing. When I said Pakistan is faltering, it was not to say that Pakistan is the only bad state. In fact, Pakistan is not the bad state at all. There might be very critical questions on some of the policies pursued by Pakistan, India, Afghanistan, and all the countries, but that does not say at all that any one of them is bad, or only bad.
I can give you a litany of Pakistani policies that I think are really terrible.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that the country is, or the
So the
state is.
point is that we've done a lot of stupid things, and I'm we continue to do those stupid things. So that's all. But what I'm saying is that in interstate and statecraft, a state is not just acting but also reacting to external stimuli. And so therefore, when we try to analyze a particular policy, whether it's in the positive direction, whether it's in the negative direction, we have to put it in a certain context. And it cannot be judged on the basis of some kind of, pure line, straight line on the graph.
That's right. No, thank you very much, Ejaz. It has been a very enriching discussion, and I would really have liked to continue it for another hour, but I understand you have to leave. And
nobody. Actually, we should have not talked about these things for more than, I would say, 5 to 10 minutes, because attention spans are so short now that even this program is, I think, about 30 minutes too long. So there you are.
No, thank you very much. It was enriching for us, and I hope, I'm sure it will be very interesting for the viewers to watch. It's always very, we always learn from you whenever you speak. So thank you very much.
That's very kind of you. That's very kind of you. Thank you, Marvi.
Thank you.